Everyone knows that Gilbert spent $15 million to boost my popularity just to spite his first love. I'm just a stand-in, with nothing for him to hold on to except a voice similar to his first love's. Later, at the concert, I prepared a proposal. Gilbert smirked indifferently. "Sally, I won't marry you, even if you try to force me in front of thousands." But he still showed up. Sitting in the front row, watching me with roses in hand, he shouted another man's name. That day, everyone said the Anderson heir was crazy, rushing into the bedroom to find the token of love I gave him, only to discover it was the sheet music of a song. The song was called Goodbye. Chapter 1. The assistants all knew I was going to propose at the concert. The wedding dress was ready, the bouquet of roses ordered, and my manager came over to check the final stage design and lighting with me. After confirming everything was in order, she set down the schedule book and sighed. "Gilbert heard about your plan to propose at the concert." My hand trembled slightly as I asked softly. "What was his reaction?" "Not much." My manager hesitated for a moment, whispering. "Just said, even if you try to pressure him into marriage in front of thousands, it's no use. He won't marry you, he probably never will." I let out a soft breath, nodding. Understood. Gilbert wouldn't care. His entire focus is now on his first love, Molly, who just returned to the country on our 3rd anniversary. I waited for Gilbert until late at night, watching the candlelight dinner slowly cool down, and finally couldn't help but call him. "Gilbert, can you come back? Today is our 3rd anniversary, I have prepared a gift for you for a long time." Gilbert's indifferent voice answered me. "Sally, listen. I know, but..." Before I could finish, Gilbert ran out of patience. "What have you prepared? A ring, or roses?" "Sally, after all these years, haven't you figured out our relationship yet?" The call cut off, leaving only a busy tone in the room. I sat quietly in my seat, taking a sip of the red wine in my glass. It tasted sour and bitter. Of course, I understood the relationship between Gilbert and me. It's very cliché, I'm the substitute for his first love, Molly. For Molly, Gilbert has both love and hate. They were childhood sweethearts. When Molly was 16, she entered a folk song competition and became famous overnight, establishing herself in the Chinese music industry from then on. But 3 years ago, Molly left Gilbert and went abroad. In order to retaliate against Molly, Gilbert found me. I debuted as a little Molly, with a clear and lazy voice, exactly like Molly. Gilbert invested money and resources in me, and I quickly became one of the most prominent new generation female singers. Externally, I received a lot of attention, fans loved me, and music critics praised me. Internally, Gilbert always looked down on me. When he was drunk, he would hold me and whisper in my ear hoarsely and cruelly. "Baby, you sing so beautifully. But no matter how good you sing, you are just a fake." I always responded with silence. I was just that insignificant when I was with Gilbert. At that time, I had just turned 20, and to help my grandmother with her surgery fees, I started singing in a bar for the first time. When greasy customers harassed me, Gilbert kicked them away and led me to safety. In the darkness of the night, a tall man in a high-end suit bent down to look at me, his eyes gentle. "Your name is Sally, right? Do you want to become a big star? If you do, come with me." In the following 3 years, I gained fame, money, my grandmother recovered her health. And I transformed from a timid and self-deprecating girl into a smiling female star at award ceremonies. Everything I had was given by Gilbert. I once thought that as long as he didn't mention breaking up, I would always be by his side. Unfortunately, Molly came back. Chapter 2. When I was with Gilbert at a private winery drinking, Molly video called. On the screen, the girl wore no makeup, but was still stunningly beautiful. "Hey, Gilbert, did I interrupt your date?" Gilbert smiled and pulled me closer to the camera. "Not an interruption, just introducing you guys, Molly, this is my girlfriend, Sally." Molly looked at me coldly. "How's it going, Sally? Are you enjoying riding on my popularity back home?" "That's not right." Gilbert sipped his wine and said lightly. When Sally first debuted, she was indeed compared to you. But she has already established her own style, starting to create original works these past few years, writing her own songs, each one a hit. How about I play you a couple for you to listen to? Molly gritted her teeth, said no need, and hung up the phone. Gilbert stared at the dark screen, his face turning cold. He wanted to continue drinking, but couldn't control his emotions, ultimately slamming the glass to the side. The liquid splashed, a few drops landing on my chest, creating red stains on my white dress, looking like blood seeping from my heart. That night, as Gilbert was showering, his phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from Molly. Gilbert, you win. I bought a ticket to return to my home country tomorrow. I have only one question for you. You once said that as long as I turned back, you would wait for me forever. Is that promise still valid? Gilbert came out of the bathroom. I lay in bed, pretending to have fallen asleep long ago. With my eyes closed, I heard him pick up his phone. The next moment, Gilbert rushed out in a hurry, not even bothering to say goodbye to me. The front door made a loud bang. I slowly sat up from the bed, looking around the Anderson home that I was most familiar with. I knew this was my last time coming to this place. Chapter 3. For a full 3 months, Gilbert and Molly stayed together. Every time I called, he would hang up on me. Rumors began circulating in the industry, suggesting that CEO Gilbert's first love returned home, and Sally is trying to force a marriage. Many reporters came to interview me, but I remained silent. When asked about Gilbert, he happened to be having dinner with Molly, so he was particularly impatient with the paparazzi. Me and Sally? That's just the relationship between a boss and an artist. Which eye of yours saw us in a romantic relationship? Beside him, Molly seemed pleased with this response, revealing a smile of victory. When the news reached me, my assistant expressed her frustration on my behalf. Gilbert, this scumbag. No, don't say that about him. I said softly. The assistant's eyes welled up, and I smiled and patted her. All right, go back to work. My concert is next month, and we have a lot to do. In reality, public opinion had always been in my favor. In the eyes of the public, Gilbert and I had a secret relationship for 3 years, but now the man himself was denying it outright. Gilbert also saw the comments from everyone, so when he learned that I planned to propose at the concert, he immediately thought I was trying to pressure him using public opinion. Therefore, the day before the concert, he sent me a message. This was the first message he sent me after Molly returned home. Sally, I advise you not to do anything foolish. We never had a romantic relationship, did we? I spent money to support you, and my only request was for you to sing to me every night, helping me fall asleep. We shared a bed, but nothing ever happened between us. The only time I called you my girlfriend was just to anger Molly. I calmly read through these messages, not replying to a single one. Chapter 4. I thought Gilbert wouldn't come to my concert. But he did. Sitting in the front row, in a black suit and black shirt, he looked just like he did when we first met. I finished singing the songs on the program list, and he listened to each one attentively. Finally, the lights dimmed, all background music faded away, and I appeared in a wedding dress. The rumors of Sally's concert proposal turned out to be true, causing a stir among the audience. Gilbert looked at me, his deep black eyes shimmering like a lake, reflecting fluctuating emotions. Gilbert, it turns out you are just like me. No matter how calm and rational one may seem on the surface, the heart still cannot be devoid of emotions. I closed my eyes and brought the microphone to my lips. Today, thank you all for coming, and I hope everyone can witness an important moment with me. I have liked a man for a full 3 years, and every song I wrote was inspired by him. I often dream of the life we could have together, even just thinking about it in my dreams makes me feel happy. But this man, for various reasons, has never proposed to me. I smiled. That's okay, let me be brave this time. I love you, will you marry me? At that moment, it felt like thousands of eyes were on Gilbert's face. In the next instant, I called out another name. Will you marry me, Ellis? The spotlight gathered in the corner, where there was a silver-haired old lady, my grandmother. Grandma smiled, patting the young man beside her. He was a slender and handsome man, dressed in a simple white shirt, resembling a pine tree growing in the snow. Ellis stared at me in disbelief, tears shimmering in his eyes. We locked eyes, as if amidst a sea of lights, there were only the two of us. In the front row, Gilbert stood up. His face was as cold as ice, his gaze trembling, his hands shaking, as if he was about to shatter in the next moment. "Sally, are you playing me?" Chapter 5. I don't know why Gilbert is so angry. He himself said we never had a romantic relationship. But I must admit, if we were completely innocent, it doesn't seem so clear-cut. After all, for 3 years, over 1,000 days and nights, we lay on the same bed, slept side by side, our breaths intertwining. Initially, Gilbert just wanted me to sing to him. He had severe sleep disorders, tried various methods like listening to ASMR, taking sleeping pills, but none worked well. Only listening to me sing could gradually lull him to sleep. At first, I sang softly, waiting for his breathing to even out in slumber before quietly getting up. But even though I was very careful, sometimes I would still make a slight noise, causing Gilbert to wake up again. So, on a rainy night, as I tried to get up while Gilbert was already asleep with closed eyes, he suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. "Don't leave," he said, the scent of cedar cologne mixed with the warmth of the blankets reaching my nose. I felt my voice trembling. "Then where should I go?" Gilbert smiled, the corners of his eyes lifting beautifully. "Sleep here." He patted the space beside him. A fine sweat broke out on my back. "No," I heard myself say. Gilbert looked at me, the smile disappearing from his face. When he wasn't smiling, he was just as the rumors portrayed him. The cold and aloof air of the Anderson family, intimidating. "Are you rejecting me?" he asked coldly. "I really can't." I bit my lip, insisting softly. Gilbert didn't say anything more. He turned over, burying his face in the blanket, not speaking to me again. I stood there at a loss for a moment, and eventually left quietly. It was raining heavily that night, the umbrella completely useless, leaving me soaked through. I took a fever-reducing pill, braving a heavy cold, and arrived at the recording site of the music variety show. The executive director, who had been very enthusiastic towards me, now wore a forced smile. He informed me that I had been replaced at the last minute. This variety show had been planned for a long time and was my best opportunity this year. The executive director had even confirmed the performance songs with me last night. At that moment, looking at the director's indifferent face, I realized clearly. Gilbert had made a call to the production team. He could support me with resources, but he could also kick me to the curb. I returned home and for a whole half-month, I had no work at all. All the scheduled commercial performances, endorsements, and ad shoots had vanished overnight. My phone was empty, as if the whole world had abandoned me. Only one text message reached me, a reminder from a pharmaceutical agent to pay the fee. He mentioned that the special medication Grandma needed would become harder to purchase next quarter. If I still needed it, payment had to be made in advance. That night, I went to Gilbert's house. He looked at the pajamas I had prepared, a casual smile on his face. "Good girl." He touched the small bear pattern on my pajamas, unable to suppress a chuckle. "First time?" Tears streamed down my face. He wiped my tears with his fingertips and softly said, "Go to sleep." Gilbert didn't do anything to me. The bed was large, and I curled up in a corner, tossing and turning. Initially, falling asleep was extremely difficult. I often listened to Gilbert's breathing, which seemed to last the whole night. Later, maybe out of habit, I began to fall asleep peacefully amidst the familiar sound of his breathing. After many nights, one time, waking up from a nightmare, Gilbert suddenly hugged me. "Sally." He shouted my name, pulling me into his arms, cold sweat all over me, my pajamas already soaked. He rested his head on my collarbone, his eyes and voice all moist. "Never leave me, okay?" In that moment, Gilbert was pitiful. Few people knew about his background. Gilbert was the child of his father and his ex-wife, raised by his grandparents since childhood. When he was in elementary school, his grandparents passed away one after the other, and he returned to his father, who had already started a new family. In his lonely teenage years, Molly was the only one who had ever warmed him, but she also abandoned him. "Don't leave me, okay?" Gilbert repeated softly, almost like a delirium. "Sally, I only have you," I heard myself softly say. "Okay." He seemed to finally relax, holding me as we fell asleep. I heard his breathing gradually become steady, in the darkness, my heart beating like a drum. This was the first time in my life that I had such intimate contact with a boy. His warm breath hit my neck, his body temperature merging with mine, enveloping me in a posture close to indulgence and protection. Rationally, I knew that this wrong beginning was far from love. Physiologically, my hormones surged and ebbed like the tide. I turned my head, gazing at Gilbert's exquisite face in the darkness. It seemed like he sensed it, as he slightly opened his eyes. "Sally." He tugged at the corners of his mouth, smiling lightly. "Have you fallen in love with me?" I shook my head. "No." He chuckled, hugging me tighter, softly whispering in my ear. "Liar." Chapter 6. In Gilbert's world, there were few women who didn't like him. After Molly went abroad, there were as many girls pursuing Gilbert as there were fish in the river. Among them were outstanding rich beauties or currently popular female artists. However, Gilbert always smiled and politely declined. If he encountered pursuers who were too persistent, he would bring me out, holding my hand with intertwined fingers, in front of the other person. And once the person left, he would immediately let go of me. When he was in a bad mood, he would even find a tissue to wipe his hands. This little scene hinted at all the interactions between Gilbert and me. On the surface, he spoiled me very much. When I was sick with a fever of 39 degrees and a sore throat that made swallowing difficult, he received a text message during a shareholders' meeting, immediately slipping out of the meeting halfway to come home and sit by my sickbed, spoon-feeding me pear soup. When I was deliberately made things difficult by my seniors during a variety show, he was overseas at that time. Seeing the latest footage, he immediately took the next flight back, with dark circles under his eyes from not sleeping for 24 hours, standing guard in the studio. The seniors, seeing Gilbert's unprecedentedly gloomy expression, were so scared that they didn't dare to say another word. Every holiday, Gilbert would come up with different ways to celebrate with me. We soaked in hot springs, lightly clinking glasses of sake in the snow-covered outdoors. We watched the stars on a cruise ship, listening to the songs of the blue whales all night. We held hands and ran through a campus filled with cherry blossoms, taking many photos with the students who were about to graduate that year. The butler, nanny, driver, and chef of the Anderson family, a dozen or so people, all said the same thing to me. "I've never seen Gilbert treat anyone so well before. He really loves you." However, only I knew. When I accidentally broke a glass piano model on Gilbert's bookshelf, a gift from Molly for his 16th birthday. Gilbert, who had been extremely gentle with me, suddenly withdrew all his smiles, turning as cold as ice. The glass piano was a gift from Molly on his 16th birthday. Trembling, I reached out to clean up, only to be stopped by Gilbert. "Don't touch it," he said. "You don't deserve to." How should I put it? That moment felt like I had been acting with Gilbert all along. In the play, he was the deeply affectionate male lead, and I was the beloved female lead. But at this moment, when the director yelled cut, we suddenly returned to reality. The actor playing the male lead put away his professional smile, revealing unmistakable indifference. My voice trembled. "I'm sorry, it was not intentional." Gilbert remained silent, his cold eyes staring at me without blinking. After a long pause, he whispered, "Kneel." Glass shards covered the floor. I looked at those sharp edges, my gaze trembling for a moment. It was a very short moment, but it brought back many memories. I remembered when a new female artist named Vanessa joined the company. Everyone called her Vanessa, much younger than me, with a face full of delicate collagen. After listening to Vanessa's audition, the producers deliberately or unintentionally said, She looks even more like Molly than Sally did back then. And Vanessa liked Gilbert very much. Everyone was afraid of Gilbert, except her. Whenever Gilbert appeared, she would immediately follow him. Gilbert smiled and said to the producers, "She's a good talent, take care of her." So, some of the resources that belonged to me gradually shifted to Vanessa. Just the day before, I happened to meet Vanessa in the dressing room. The company had borrowed a brand's high-end light pink fishtail skirt for me to try on. But when I arrived, Vanessa was already wearing the skirt. "Pink suits me better, don't you think so, Sister Sally?" Vanessa turned to me, her gaze fearless yet innocent, with an undeniable confidence. I calmly said, "The brand and the artist have a collaboration. This skirt was borrowed by the company in my name, so I can't let you wear it." Vanessa smiled. I asked Gilbert. He said if I like it, I can wear it. Standing in front of the glass shards on the floor, I thought of Vanessa's confident face. I also thought of my grandmother, sitting on the bed, knitting yarn while pointing at me on TV for the visiting neighbor lady. "This is my granddaughter, she sings beautifully, right?" Perhaps I stood frozen for too long. Gilbert lost patience and turned towards the door. He hadn't taken a few steps when he heard a faint sound behind him. Gilbert turned around, his eyes flickering. I knelt down. Amidst the shattered glass pieces on the floor, I didn't even move, simply knelt right on them. The sharp edges of the glass shards pierced into my calf, blood quickly seeping out. But it was as if I couldn't feel the pain. "Gilbert, I'm sorry, I was wrong." My voice carried an extreme sense of humility. "Please don't be angry, you can punish me, but don't ignore me." I spoke slowly. "I really can't be without you." As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw the immense satisfaction in Gilbert's eyes. Everyone has their own preferences, and Gilbert, he liked my humility. Molly was too proud, like the moon hanging high in the sky. And I was like moonlight in a puddle. If he stepped on me, I would shatter, but eventually, I would heal as good as new, obediently crawling at his feet. This feeling must be quite captivating. He squatted down in front of me, tenderly touching the wound on my leg. I flinched from the pain, but didn't pull away. Instead, I closed my eyes slightly, as if enjoying his warmth. Gilbert gently lifted my chin, making me look directly into his eyes. "Sally, do you love me like this?" I didn't answer, blinked once, then another time, a tear falling down. The large teardrop landed on Gilbert's hand back. He seemed startled, yet also thoroughly satisfied. Gilbert picked me up horizontally, striding out of the Anderson family's gate, telling the driver, "To the hospital." That night, many paparazzi captured us. Gilbert in a black suit, me in a white nightgown, nestled in his arms. Many people went crazy with comments, saying this was the century's Princess Carrie of the CEO and the female star. I looked at the comments, smiling bitterly. Although the doctor quickly treated my wound, after it healed, a noticeable scar remained on my calf. Initially, I would cover it with concealer when attending events. Then one day, Gilbert intentionally or unintentionally said that this was the mark he left on my body. After that, not only did I stop covering the scar, but I also collaborated with a famous tattoo artist in the industry to turn it into a flowering thorn vine. Gilbert asked me about the meaning of this design. In reality, there wasn't one, it was just a design closest to the shape of the scar created by the tattoo artist and me. But I pondered for only 2 seconds before telling Gilbert. The meaning is, love may hurt us, but love will also flourish. This answer probably pleased Gilbert a lot. He smiled, gently stroking my hair. Later, I wore that light pink fishtail skirt and attended events. Vanessa had disappeared from the company. The producers told me that it was CEO Gilbert who said a company should not promote too many similar artists, so they terminated the contract with Vanessa. Like this, all the company's resources were mine again. To the outside world, I seemed to be sailing smoothly. Behind the scenes, I was constantly undergoing therapy. The counselor and I had long conversations, and then in the diagnosis book, it was written. The patient has an intimate partner with a dominant personality, alternating between warm emotional support and destructive emotional abuse, leading the patient to develop Stockholm Syndrome. To express my inner emotions, I started writing songs myself, one after another, sometimes even sleeping in the recording studio. Gilbert would come to see me, covering me with his suit jacket. When I woke up, I found him standing by the side, reading my lyrics, his dark eyes glistening with emotion. All the time we spent together has been recorded by you in music. He commented with a smile, to which I obediently nodded. Gilbert considered all these songs as love letters written to him. He could match the lyrics with our life experiences. When I wrote, "Snowflakes fall into the water, tears fall into the wine glass," it was about us drinking sake in a hot spring, watching snowflakes gently descend. When I wrote, "Cherry blossoms fall, I bloom," it was about us running hand in hand through a cherry blossom grove. Gilbert never doubted my love for him. Even at concerts, my performance songs were all these songs. So, no matter what, he just couldn't accept. Why wasn't he the one I proposed to? Chapter 7. Gilbert was furious. Backstage, as I looked at my phone, the news, "Sally proposed at the concert, groom is not Gilbert," had sparked discussions on various platforms, quickly becoming a top trending topic. At the same time, my assistant rushed in anxiously. "I heard CEO Gilbert making a call, he said he wants to blacklist you." "Let him." I smiled lightly. Before I could finish speaking, the door to the dressing room suddenly burst open, and Gilbert stormed in, breathing unevenly. "Sally, who exactly is Ellis?" "My boyfriend." "Your boyfriend is clearly..." Gilbert stopped mid-sentence. He couldn't continue. After all, it was he himself, enjoying the feeling of being loved by me, and repeatedly reminding me. "We are not in a romantic relationship." I raised my lips slightly. "CEO Gilbert, as you've said to the outside world, between us, it's just the relationship between a boss and an artist. Our company doesn't have rules against artists dating, so if I have a boyfriend, why are you so upset?" Gilbert was speechless, then after a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, "Sally, stop pretending to be clueless here, don't forget everything you have is from me." I looked at Gilbert, and he gazed back at me. In those black eyes, there was a sense of absolute control. He will definitely have the upper hand. After all, in the past 3 years, as long as he said that sentence, I would unconditionally compromise. But at this moment, I smiled and said, "It's yours." Gilbert's eyes widened suddenly. "I'm giving it all back to you." I smiled. "Tonight is my farewell performance, and after that, I'm leaving the entertainment circle." For the first time in my life, I saw Gilbert in a panic. I had already changed my clothes, picked up my belongings, and walked towards the door of the dressing room. He stopped me, his voice trembling. "Sally." At that moment, he suddenly realized that he had nothing left to hold over me. So, he couldn't keep me either. I nodded politely at him. "Goodbye, CEO Gilbert." I bypassed the stunned Gilbert and left gracefully. After a few steps, I suddenly remembered something and turned back to say, "Gilbert." He turned to look at me, hope in his eyes. I smiled. "In the bedroom, there's the last song I wrote, it's a gift for you, celebrating our 3rd anniversary."
Chapter 8. Gilbert. Sally had left. It took Gilbert a long time to come back to his senses amidst the calls of those around him. He almost rushed back home without stopping, bursting into the bedroom and searching everywhere. It wasn't on the table, nor in the cabinet. Eventually, Gilbert found the last gift Sally had left for him under the pillow. He had thought it might be roses or a diamond ring, but it was neither, just a demo of a song. The song was titled "Goodbye." Thank you for all the encounters, but finally being able to say goodbye to you. For some reason, this seemingly ordinary lyric crushed Gilbert. He remembered a late night long ago, holding Sally and making her promise never to leave him. She had clearly promised. Why deceive himself? She had said she loved him so many times, were they all lies? Wait a minute. Gilbert stood in the bedroom, suddenly feeling like a bucket of ice-cold water had been poured over him. Because he realized a terrible detail. Sally had never said she loved him. It was he who repeatedly asked. and her response was always silence. Gilbert was too confident, while Sally was too humble, so Gilbert automatically took all that silence as consent. So, does she never loved him at all? Just for resources, just for the future. Gilbert was on the verge of going crazy. He called all his contacts in the industry, producers, directors, variety show planners. Using withdrawal of investments as a threat, he coerced them all, forbidding any further cooperation with Sally. Soon, the news of Anderson Corporation blacklisting Sally spread throughout the industry. Wasn't Sally after resources and a future? Now that she had cut off all hope, she would surely come back to him, right? Gilbert consoled himself. But no. A day passed, then two. Many, many days passed. Gilbert waited for Sally to come to him, but she never did. This move had always worked before, but this time, it failed. Gilbert finally panicked. He realized that Sally was serious about quitting the industry, as she had said backstage at the concert. Like those female stars in the 20th century who retired after getting married, she was done singing. So she no longer needed him either. For the first time in his life, Gilbert took the initiative to find Sally. In the past, a phone call from him would bring Sally rushing to his home immediately. But this was the first time he sought reconciliation with Sally during this Cold War. Chapter 9. Gilbert. Sally's home was located deep in an alley, not large, but exquisitely decorated. But by now, most of the house was empty. Sally has moved out. The landlord, who helped open the door, told Gilbert. She has checked out. She said if someone comes looking for her, they can visit her bedroom. Guided by the landlord, Gilbert went to Sally's bedroom. There was a large photo wall. The protagonist of each photo was Sally and the man in the white shirt. What was his name again? Oh right, Ellis. In the photos, Ellis and Sally posed together in a hot spring amidst heavy snow. Smiling at the camera on a cruise ship, with a sky full of stars behind them. Running hand in hand as cherry blossoms fell, like a couple of college graduates about to part ways. Gilbert started to tremble. He had always thought that every song of Sally's was a love letter to him. He was mistaken, completely mistaken. Those songs might indeed be love letters. But they are not written for him.
Chapter 10. Gilbert must have seen those photos I left for him. Because he was completely shattered. At 10:30 in the morning, I received his call. From a distant place, I listened to his hoarse, almost choked up voice. Sally, who is Ellis after all? I remained silent for a long time, then gently chuckled. No results, right? Gilbert would definitely go and find out who Ellis was. But no matter how he used all his contacts, he couldn't uncover Ellis's true identity. Not important. I smiled at Gilbert. I'm leaving the country with him. For the first time in his life, Gilbert softened in front of me. He said, Sally, don't go. I'm begging you. And for the first time in my life, I refused Gilbert. Thank you for everything, but I can finally say goodbye to you. I hummed this melody softly, then hung up the phone. Next, I removed the SIM card, cut it, and threw it in the trash. Goodbye, Gilbert. Goodbye, Ellis.
Chapter 11. Gilbert. After that, Gilbert looked for Sally for many years. But Sally seemed to have vanished into thin air. After recovering from his initial breakdown, Gilbert tried hard to convince himself. Don't care, she was just a stand-in. Molly had returned, so a broken counterfeit was nothing worth caring about. He tried to focus all his attention on Molly. Molly was no longer arrogant towards Gilbert, she would sweetly coax him, getting him to accompany her to the recording studio, spending resources on her. You spent $15 million on that stand-in back then, so now, how much should you spend on me? Gilbert really wanted to promise something, but in the end, he just said, let me hear you sing first. Molly was very disappointed, but still sang the demo the producer had written for her. Gilbert's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Not right, he said. The producer switched songs, Molly sang it again, but Gilbert still said the same thing. Something's off. He couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it just wasn't the same as he remembered. Why don't you sing like before? He asked Molly. Did you change your singing style? Why does it sound so strange now? Finally, the producer couldn't stand it anymore and reminded him. President Gilbert, Molly's voice and singing style are almost identical to when she debuted, there's no difference at all. At that moment, Gilbert felt as if struck by lightning. He suddenly realized that the one he truly liked might be Sally. And the later Sally was completely different from Molly. Gilbert began listening to Sally's albums over and over again. Those songs were all about her love story with Ellis. He would feel pain every time he listened, yet he kept cycling through them as if self-inflicting. The one song he dared not listen to was Goodbye, even though it was the only one she truly wrote for him. Time passed by. In a restaurant, Gilbert ran into a familiar face. He felt like he had seen the person before but couldn't remember until he was almost done eating. Ellis. He had seen this person during the concert confession back then. It's just that the light at the concert was too dazzling, and no one, including him, could see Ellis's specific appearance clearly. But today's Ellis happened to be wearing a white shirt, reminding Gilbert of that figure, awakening his memory. Almost without thinking, Gilbert walked over and sat across from the man. The man was originally cutting a steak, and upon seeing Gilbert, he slightly paused, but then politely smiled. President Gilbert, right? He was gentle and polite, leaving Gilbert somewhat speechless. After a long silence, he whispered, "You are Ellis, aren't you?" The man smiled but remained silent. "How is Sally doing?" After a while, the man pushed his glasses up, chuckled lightly, and said, "Perhaps it's time to tell you the truth. I don't know if Sally is doing well." Gilbert's eyes flickered fiercely. "Did you get a divorce?" The man shook his head. "We never got married." He took out his business card from his suit pocket and handed it to Gilbert. Gilbert looked down. Psychological counselor, Kennedy. Gilbert suddenly started trembling. What does this mean? For over a year, I was Miss Sally's psychological counselor. She was in a very painful intimate relationship, and after much discussion, we found the only way out was to distance herself from the person causing her pain. To fully execute this, she asked me to act in a play with her, and I agreed. Gilbert held onto the business card, unable to come to his senses for a long, long time. After what seemed like an eternity, Kennedy noticed that Gilbert was smiling. He murmured, "So, the person Sally loves is indeed me. All those songs were written for me. Ellis doesn't exist." Kennedy looked at Gilbert in silence, then whispered softly after a moment, "Gilbert, if I were you, I would feel sad instead. Miss Sally loves you, yet she didn't hesitate to pay such a huge price, so decisively bidding you farewell. Have you ever thought about what you did wrong?" Gilbert felt as if struck by lightning. "Lastly, let me tell you one thing. Actually, you already know, perhaps you forgot, or maybe you never really cared. Ellis, that was the pseudonym Miss Sally used when she first started singing in the bar." Gilbert suddenly looked up. Kennedy shrugged. "She said, when you rescued her from the greasy customers in the bar, she genuinely liked you." Kennedy laughed. Gilbert sat there, unable to come to his senses for a long time. So, saying goodbye to Ellis, in fact, meant bidding farewell to the self who loved Gilbert. If only he could remember. If only he could remember that Ellis was once Sally's name during the concert proposal or in the days that followed. Perhaps they both still had hope. But he never did. So she left, resolute in her departure, never looking back. Chapter 12. Gilbert. Gilbert's emotions began to deteriorate severely. He already had bipolar disorder and severe sleep disorders. Originally, it was Sally's songs that helped him fall asleep. But now, he played Sally's albums over and over again and still couldn't sleep. He finally realized that what gave him peace of mind wasn't Sally's songs but Sally herself. His emotions worsened, and Gilbert started relying on alcohol. He would drink heavily all night until he passed out. Yet in his dreams, it was still that face. Waking up in the hospital, his secretary's face stained with tears, she informed him of the test results. Stomach cancer. As if heaven took pity on Gilbert, in the second week of diagnosis, he saw a photo online of a foreign seaside band performing. The female singer in the picture was bright, sunny, and full of vitality. Gilbert stared at the photo for a long, long time, confirming he wasn't mistaken. It was indeed Sally.
Chapter 13. This is my third year performing with the band at the beach. It's an uncommercialized island, not many tourists, and the locals are all blonde and blue-eyed, no one recognizes me. I tried many music styles that I had never done before in my home country, living a peaceful and fulfilling life. Until one day, I saw Gilbert again. He had lost a lot of weight, looking pale and haggard. I always thought that when we met again, my emotions would be turbulent. But now I found myself surprisingly calm inside. I walked towards him, friendly, like an old friend, and greeted him. He looked at me, his eyes filled with mist. Sally. The sun was setting at that moment, so I invited him to sit on the rocks by the sea, drinking beer and watching the sunset. Gilbert's gaze fell on my lower leg, where a tattoo covered old scars. Following his gaze, I smiled and said, "You once asked me about the meaning of this tattoo, and my answer back then was a lie. But now, I really like this design. Its meaning is, after thorns, there will always be blossoms." Gilbert remained silent for a long time and softly asked, "Sally, you loved me, right?" I smiled contentedly. Yes, I did. It was the first time I answered Gilbert directly, and I heard him let out a long breath. But the next moment, I spoke again. But I love freedom and dignity more. Under the sunset, I saw Gilbert stiffen for a moment. After a while, Gilbert lowered his eyes, tears in them. "Sally, I'm sorry." I shook my head with a smile. Actually, the belated apology was too late. But I still said, "It's okay." Not forgiveness. But letting go. Telling myself, "It's okay, after passing through the thorns, we will eventually meet roses."
Chapter 14. Gilbert. Gilbert left. When they watched the sunset together, he noticed that Sally's belly was slightly bulging. He didn't ask, afraid he couldn't handle the reality. But as he walked away, he couldn't help but look back. He saw Sally return to the band, speaking intimately with the drummer. He was a handsome and unruly man, with medium-length hair. When he played the drums, there was a crazy energy about him, but his eyes towards Sally were so gentle. She truly embarked on a new life. While he remained forever indulged in the past. A sharp pain pierced Gilbert's stomach suddenly, making him realize he couldn't go back home. The painful body couldn't endure sitting on a plane for another dozen hours, and there seemed to be nothing worth holding onto back home. So, why not? Just stay here. Chapter 15. I held the guitar, played the final chord, and suddenly heard the sound of water in the distance. It seemed like something had fallen into the sea. I looked at the ocean, the surface calm, embracing all creation. The sunset had completely disappeared into the sea, the water shimmering like molten gold. For some reason, a scalding tear rolled down from my eyes, splashing onto the ground. I wiped my tears, gazing up at the towering sky. The sky was high, the water wide, and the departed ones were already far away. As I walked to the end of the water, I finally found love and freedom.